The energy shifts the moment Tamar opens her mouth. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. The kind of quiet that makes people lean closer to their screens because they can feel something dangerous is about to be said. And when Tamar Braxton finally lets it slip, it doesn't sound like tea. It sounds like years of pressure cracking all at once. Phones start buzzing immediately. Group chats light up. Bloggers stop mid-scroll. Because this isn't another messy sibling argument or a shady comment taken out of context. This is Tamar pulling back the curtain on something that, if true, changes the entire way people look at the Braxton family dynamic. She doesn't ease into it. She doesn't joke. Her voice tightens, her words slow down, and that's when she says it. That there are things their mother did that crossed a line, things that were never meant to be spoken out loud. And then she brings up Towanda Braxton. That's when everything stops, because Towanda has always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the sister who swallows her feelings so everyone else can breathe easier. Tamar describes her not as weak, but as loyal to a fault. Someone who carried the family's emotional weight without ever asking for credit. And according to Tamar, that loyalty was used against her in the worst way. She says there was pressure, control, emotional leverage, and that it all traced back to their mother, Evelyn Braxton. Tamar doesn't paint it as chaos. She paints it as strategy, a household where obedience mattered more than comfort, where silence was rewarded and resistance came with consequences. She talks about growing up in a home where fear didn't always look loud. Sometimes it looked like guilt, obligation, and being reminded of everything you owed the family. And then Tamar drops the line that sends the internet into a tailspin. She says Towanda was pushed into a situation involving Michael Jr. No details at first. Just that sentence hanging in the air like smoke. Heavy, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Tamar doesn't say it casually. She says it like someone who's been carrying someone else's pain for years and finally can't anymore. Her voice cracks when she talks about Towanda's silence, about how certain things were never discussed on camera, never allowed to be acknowledged, no matter how much damage they caused behind closed doors. Almost instantly, people start replaying old clips in their minds. Moments where Towanda went quiet mid-sentence. Times when she looked toward Evelyn before answering a question. Scenes that once felt like normal family tension suddenly feel darker, more controlled. Tamar explains that this wasn't about romance or choice or mutual anything. She describes it as pressure dressed up as duty, as being told what was best for the family until saying no didn't feel like an option anymore. And the way Tamar says it makes it clear. She's not guessing. She's not speculating. She's talking about something she believes happened, something she says she witnessed emotionally, if not directly. The internet reacts exactly how you'd expect. Some people refuse to believe it. They call it exaggerated. They say Tamar is emotional, impulsive, always the one who says too much. Others say this explains everything. The tension, the silence, the way Towanda always seemed to carry sadness she never named. And then, there are the people who focus on Evelyn, because Tamar doesn't describe her mother as careless. She describes her as powerful, as someone who knew exactly which emotional buttons to press, as someone who ruled the household with authority that didn't allow dissent. Tamar says that when Evelyn wanted something done, it wasn't a request, it was an expectation. She also makes it clear that Towanda wasn't the only one affected, that this kind of control shaped all of them in different ways. Some rebelled, some exploded, some stayed quiet, and some, she says, paid the highest price. By the time Tamar finishes speaking, the damage is already done, not because everything has been proven, but because the narrative people believed for decades suddenly doesn't feel complete anymore. Fans start asking the same question over and over in different ways. Why was Towanda always the one sacrificing? Why was she always protecting everyone else? And what exactly did Evelyn hold over her to keep her silent for so long? That's when the story stops being gossip and starts feeling like something much heavier. Because Tamar didn't just accuse her mother of being controlling. She accused her of crossing a line that changes everything. And that's only the beginning. The shock doesn't fade after Tamar's words land. It mutates. It spreads. Because once that idea is out there, people start rewinding the past with a completely different lens. Old interviews, old episodes, old pauses that once felt awkward now feel intentional. And the more fans revisit the footage, the more uneasy everything becomes. Towanda's silence suddenly feels loud. There are moments people used to laugh off, her stopping mid-sentence, her eyes darting toward her mother before answering, her body stiffening whenever certain topics came up. Back then, it was brushed off as family tension or reality TV nerves. Now people are asking if it was something else entirely. If that quiet wasn't politeness, but fear. Tamar leans into that idea without spelling it out directly. She talks about how Towanda always carried the role of peacekeeper, how she learned early that harmony mattered more than honesty, how saying no in that household came with consequences that weren't always loud but were always heavy. And the way Tamar frames it, that pressure didn't disappear once they became adults. It just evolved. She describes a dynamic where loyalty was currency, where obedience was praised, where the idea of doing what's best for the family was used to shut down discomfort. And she makes it clear that Towanda was especially vulnerable to that kind of emotional leverage. Not because she was weak, but because she cared too much. That's where the story starts to darken. Because Tamar doesn't describe Towanda as someone who agreed to anything freely. She describes hesitation, resistance, tears, and then resignation, the kind that comes when someone realizes pushing back will only make things worse. She talks about how Towanda would internalize pain rather than cause conflict, how she would carry things alone so the family could stay intact. And then Tamar says something that shifts the tone completely. She says Towanda didn't feel like she had a choice. That sentence alone sends the internet into overdrive. People start debating the meaning of forced. Some try to soften it. Others say there's no soft version of coercion. Bloggers start breaking down family power dynamics. Comment sections fill with stories from people who grew up in controlling households, saying they recognize the pattern immediately. The narrative stops being about celebrity drama and starts sounding uncomfortably familiar. Attention swings back to Evelyn. Not the TV version, not the church-going matriarch with sharp one-liners, but the authority figure Tamar describes. A woman whose approval meant everything, whose disapproval could destabilize the entire family. Tamar talks about guilt being used like a weapon, about reminders of sacrifice, about emotional debts that could never be fully repaid. She doesn't scream it, she doesn't dramatize it, she just lays it out calmly, like she's finally done pretending it didn't happen. And then, the internet does what it always does. It starts connecting dots. People point out how Michael Jr. was always treated differently, how he seemed protected, insulated, defended, how the daughters were disciplined while the son was shielded. And suddenly, Tamar's claim doesn't sound random to a lot of viewers. It sounds like part of a larger pattern. But here's where things get even more complicated. Because Tamar also suggests that Michael Jr. may not have fully understood what was happening at the time, that he might have believed everything was mutual, that the pressure Towanda felt wasn't something he could see, because it was coming from somewhere else entirely. That detail flips the outrage in multiple directions at once. Some people shift their anger fully toward Evelyn. Others argue accountability can exist on more than one level. And some just feel sick realizing how messy, layered, and painful the situation actually is. Meanwhile, Towanda says nothing. No posts, no statements, no denials, and that silence becomes the loudest part of the story. Fans don't read it as avoidance. They read it as someone who's been trained not to speak. Someone who learned that saying less was safer than saying anything at all. Tamar, on the other hand, sounds done protecting everyone but herself. She talks about how keeping this secret hurt her too. How watching Towanda carry the weight alone made her feel complicit. How being painted as the messy one for years felt unfair when the real mess was buried so much deeper. And the way she says it makes it clear, this isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to keep lying. By this point, the Braxton family image is cracking in real time. Not because everything has been proven, but because the emotional logic behind Tamar's words feels too consistent to ignore. Too many moments suddenly make sense. Too many silences line up. And as people argue online, one uncomfortable truth settles in. If Tamar is telling even part of the truth, then Towanda has been protecting this family for decades. And whatever comes next is going to force everyone, especially her, to finally choose between silence and freedom. By the time the conversation reaches that point, the family drama has fully transformed into something heavier. Something people can't just scroll past and forget. Because once Tamar frames it the way she does, it stops sounding like sibling tension and starts sounding like a system. A system built on control, silence, and emotional debt. And that's when the focus lands squarely on Towanda again. Fans start noticing how she's always been positioned, never leading, never fully free, always managing everyone else's emotions. The sister who calms the room, the sister who absorbs conflict so it doesn't explode. Tamar describes that role as learned survival, not personality. as something Towanda adopted because it was safer than pushing back. And once you hear it like that, it's impossible not to see it everywhere. Tamar talks about moments that were edited out, conversations that producers weren't allowed to touch, subjects that would instantly shut Evelyn down whenever they got too close to the surface. She hints that there were confrontations behind the scenes. Not screaming matches for television, but cold, controlled shutdowns. The kind that leave everyone shaken, but silent. According to Tamar, Towanda tried to resist more than once, tried to speak up, tried to assert herself. And each time, the consequences weren't explosive. They were isolating, emotional withdrawal, guilt. Being reminded of what she owed the family. Being told that if she didn't fall in line, everything would collapse and it would be her fault. That kind of pressure doesn't look like force on camera. It looks like compliance. The internet reacts fast and hard. Some fans are furious at Tamar for saying it out loud. They accuse her of airing family business, of taking things too far, of disrespecting her mother. Others defend her fiercely, saying this is exactly what happens when one person finally refuses to carry everyone else's secrets. But what really shakes people is how Towanda responds, or rather, how she doesn't. She doesn't jump online to deny it. She doesn't rush to protect Evelyn's image. She doesn't scold Tamar for speaking. She stays quiet, and that quiet doesn't feel strategic. It feels familiar. Like someone who has spent a lifetime being told that silence is safer than truth. Tamar addresses that silence directly. She says she understands it, that she doesn't blame Towanda for not speaking. That part of loving her sister is refusing to force her into another impossible position. Tamar makes it clear she's not trying to drag Towanda into the spotlight. She's trying to take the weight off her shoulders. She also makes it clear that she's done shielding Evelyn from accountability. Not because she hates her mother, but because she believes loving someone doesn't mean protecting harmful behavior. Tamar talks about how authority in that household was absolute, how discipline blurred into domination, how faith, respect, and obedience were often used interchangeably, and how growing up under that kind of rule shapes the choices you think you're allowed to make as an adult. At this point, the Braxton family image doesn't just crack, it fractures. Fans start rewatching old episodes with a different emotional lens. Moments that once felt like entertainment now feel uncomfortable. The way Towanda defers, the way Evelyn shuts conversations down, the way Tamar explodes when she feels unheard. Suddenly, the chaos makes sense. It wasn't random, it was pressure leaking out. And then there's Michael Jr. Tamar's framing complicates everything. She doesn't paint him as a mastermind. She paints him as someone who may not have understood the full context. Someone who believed things were mutual because the real coercion wasn't coming from him. It was coming from elsewhere. That detail forces people to sit with the idea that manipulation can trap more than one person at the same time. The outrage doesn't disappear. It just redirects. People start talking about generational patterns, about strict parenting crossing into control, about daughters being taught to sacrifice while sons are protected, about how families can look functional on the outside while hiding deep harm underneath. Tamar ends her revelation without asking for forgiveness, without begging for understanding. She simply says she's done carrying secrets that aren't hers to carry anymore, that protecting the family at the expense of Towanda's truth never sat right with her, and that if telling the truth costs her peace, she's willing to pay that price. The silence that follows is heavy, because now the world is waiting to see if Towanda ever speaks, waiting to see if Evelyn responds, waiting to see whether the family confronts what Tamar has exposed, or closes ranks and pretends it never happened. One thing is clear though, the narrative has changed. The Braxton story can't go back to what it was. Too many people are listening differently now. Too many moments make sense in a way they never did before. And too many viewers recognize these dynamics from their own lives to dismiss it as just celebrity mess. This isn't just drama anymore. It's a conversation about power inside families, about silence as survival, about what happens when the truth finally breaks through decades of control. And if you're rocking with this breakdown, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because this story's far from over.